The first shoe vanished on a Tuesday. Dina Wald noticed it the way anyone notices something missing. After a full minute of standing at her front door, staring at an empty patch of ground where her left boot should have been, with the slow, confused look of someone who is absolutely sure they are not wrong. She checked inside. She checked under the bench. She checked behind the clay pot with the dead herb she kept forgetting to replace. No boot. She told herself she must have left it at the clinic. She pulled on her spare pair, locked up, and walked to work through the pale gold light of an Oran prime morning, her prosthetic leg clicking faintly on the stone path in the way it always did when the air was cold. Hearthgate was already awake. The market rows near the human district were setting up, canvas roofs snapping open, the smell of roasted grain and lamp oil drifting from the stalls. In the distance, past the wide copper-colored rooftops of the Drackery Quarter, the first of the great winged shapes rose into the sky. Long necks stretched forward, enormous wings rowing slow and easy through the thin air. Normal morning. Nothing unusual. She forgot about the boot entirely. Wednesday, the spare was gone. This time Dina stood at her door for considerably longer. She was a practical woman, and practical women do not enjoy being made to feel foolish, especially by their own footwear. She checked every room. She checked the clinic lost and found when she arrived at work. She asked Ren, her assistant, if he had seen anything, which produced a look from him that suggested she had asked whether the sky was perhaps made of bread. "Your shoes are disappearing," Ren said. "One shoe each time," Dina said, "which is what makes it strange. What makes it strange is that your shoes are disappearing." She wore her waterproof sandals on Wednesday. They were not comfortable for a 12-hour shift. Her mood by evening was not particularly warm. Thursday, one sandal gone. The other left sitting perfectly straight on the doorstep, alone. Friday, a low work shoe lifted clean from where she'd set it beside the bench. Saturday, one rubber boot taken. Dina stood in her doorway with the remaining boot in her hand and felt something shift in her thinking. Not quite anger, not quite amusement, but a third thing that lived somewhere between them. Whatever was doing this was doing it consistently, deliberately. Always one shoe. Never two. Never anything else. The door was untouched. The window seals were intact. Her small clay pot, still dead, still forgotten, had not been disturbed. She told Ren on Saturday afternoon, and he did not laugh. To his credit, though his face did something complicated trying not to. "Set a sensor," he said. "I have a motion alert borrowed from the supply room. It's meant for tracking cargo movement, but it'll catch anything bigger than a ground rat." Dina agreed mostly because she was running out of footwear. They set the sensor that evening, angled low toward the doorstep, and Ren calibrated it to record rather than alarm. "So we don't wake the whole street," he said, which Dina appreciated. Sunday morning, her canvas sneaker was gone. She pulled up the sensor footage while Ren stood behind her with his cup of morning tea, peering over her shoulder. The footage was time-stamped at 4:42 in the morning. The path was dark except for the low amber glow of the colony's overnight lights, which ran on a dim cycle to respect Drackery night sight. For a long moment the step was empty. Then something moved in from the left. It was small, far smaller than Dina expected. She had imagined, in the vague way one imagines a thief, something roughly human-shaped. What stepped into the glow of the sensor light was nothing like that. A dragon. A baby one. No taller at the shoulder than a large dog. Built like something between a lizard and a cat, with wings folded flat against a body covered in scales that caught the amber light and turned it a deep, shifting blue, like the inside of a wave just before it breaks. Gold tipped each wing edge. Gold touched the end of the long tail that swished once, carefully, as the creature stepped up to the doorstep. It looked left. It looked right. It leaned down and picked up the canvas sneaker with both front claws, handling it with extraordinary care, as if it were something precious and possibly fragile. Then it turned and trotted quickly into the tall silver grass that ran along the edge of the path and vanished without a sound. Ren said nothing for a full 10 seconds. "It checked both ways," he said finally, like it was crossing a road. Dina watched the empty doorstep on the frozen footage. The sneaker was gone. The little dragon was gone. The amber light still glowed on the empty stone like nothing had happened at all. She thought about reporting it. The colony had a wildlife interaction protocol. Drackery hatchlings wandering into the human district was not unheard of, though it was uncommon, and there were proper channels. She knew the proper channels. She had used the proper channels many times. She watched the footage again. The careful look left. The careful look right. The gentle, deliberate way those small claws had lifted the shoe. She did not reach for the report form. Instead, she went to her closet and found her oldest pair of boots, battered, soft-soled, worn at the heel, and set them on the front step before she left for work. She was going to follow that dragon. She set the old boots on the step and went to bed at sundown. This was harder than it sounds. Dina was not someone who slept well on a good night, and this was not a good night. It was a night full of questions that kept rearranging themselves in her head, like furniture being moved in a room above her. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and told herself, firmly, to sleep. She woke at 4 in the morning without needing an alarm. She dressed in dark clothes. She tucked herself behind the corner of the rain screen on her clinic porch, a narrow overhang attached to the side of the building, deep in shadow, close enough to the front step that she could see it clearly. She had a light jacket because Oran Prime mornings were cold. She had no coffee because she could not risk the smell carrying. She waited. At 4:38, the silver grass at the edge of the path shifted. A small nose appeared first, dark and round, testing the air. Then 2 enormous eyes caught the ambient light, pale amber irises, vertical pupils, blinking once with slow focus. Then the rest of the hatchling emerged, belly low, wings pressed flat, moving with a care that was almost funny given her size. She was even smaller in person, maybe the length of Dina's arm from shoulder to fingertip. Her blue scales had a soft luminescence in the dark that Dina hadn't expected, not bright, just faintly alive, like the glow of deep water. She moved to the step, sniffed the boots with both nostrils, considered them for a moment that felt surprisingly serious. Then she picked up the left one and turned. Dina followed. She had to stay far back. The hatchling had better hearing than anything Dina had ever tracked. Every few steps Dina froze when the small tail swished or the ears tilted, and waited until the dragon moved again before placing her next footstep on the soft path edge where the dirt was quieter than the stone. They moved through the edge of the human district, past the dark clinic windows, past the cargo shed, past the water management unit that hummed low all night. The hatchling moved with clear purpose. She had done this walk many times. They crossed into the border stretch between districts, where the colony planners had left a wide natural buffer of silver grass and low scrub. Dina had walked this path in daylight dozens of times. In the pre-dawn dark it felt wider than she remembered. Then into the Drackery market quarter, which was empty and enormous at this hour. Stall frames like the skeletons of large creatures. Dina was struck, as she always was in the Drackery quarter, by the scale of things. Door frames she could walk through only if she went sideways. Benches that sat at the height of her shoulder. The whole district built for beings who stood twice her height and 4 times her mass. The hatchling moved quickly here. Confident. Home territory. On the far side of the market, the ground dropped away into a natural ravine, a split in the rock that the colony planners had left alone, too awkward to build in and too stable to fill. The locals called it the Low Hollow. Dina had heard the name, but never been inside it. She stopped at the edge and looked down. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could see the bottom of the ravine, maybe 6 meters below, accessible by a rough slope of flat rocks that worked like stairs if you were the right size. And at the bottom, tucked against the far wall where the rock curved inward to form a shallow shelter, a second dragon. About the same age as the blue one, maybe slightly larger. His scales were a dark forest green with faint copper markings along his spine. He was sitting against the shelter wall with his rear left leg extended in front of him at an angle that was immediately, obviously wrong. The leg bent where legs should not bend. The joint at the lower half was turned outward, the foot flat in a way that could not be comfortable. The whole structure of it clearly something that had gone wrong before he was even born. Around him, arranged with a carefulness that hit Dina somewhere behind the ribs, was a collection of human shoes. Not a pile. A collection. Each shoe had been placed separately, propped or laid flat, examined, and then set aside. Her rubber boot. Her work shoe. Her sandal. The old hiking boot she'd worn for 3 years. Every missing shoe was here, gathered and sorted as if someone had been building an archive. The blue hatchling descended the rock slope with practiced ease, the old boot still in her claws. She presented it to the green one with a small sound, a low trill, almost questioning. The green hatchling looked at the boot. He made a sound back. Then he carefully took it in his front claws and examined it, turning it, looking at the sole, bending it gently. He looked at his own foot. He looked at the boot. Then he set it down with the others. Dina understood then, all at once, what she was looking at. The blue dragon had seen Dina walk, had noticed the rhythm of her gait, the slight difference in how her prosthetic side moved compared to her natural one, and the soft-soled shoes that accommodated it. She had decided, in the wordless logical way of a young creature solving a problem, that the shoes were the answer. That if she brought enough of them, one would help. The green hatchling's leg was not going to be fixed by a shoe. But someone had been trying very hard to fix it with the only idea she had. Dina sat down on the edge of the ravine. Her prosthetic leg extended in front of her. She reached down, slowly and deliberately, and unfastened the lower cuff. Both hatchlings froze and stared up at her. She held the prosthetic limb up so they could see it clearly in the growing light. Then she climbed down the rocks into the low hollow. The blue hatchling spread her wings. It was not an attack. Dina understood that even in the half-second it took to happen. It was the instinct of a small creature putting itself between something large and someone it was protecting. The wings were not even fully grown. They had that slightly unfinished look of young Dracarys wings, the membrane still thin enough that the early light passed through it in pale gold shapes. Dina stopped moving. She sat down on the nearest flat rock and put both hands on her knees, open and visible. She made herself as small as she could, which was not very small, but was the gesture that mattered. The blue hatchling held the wings spread for a few seconds. Then slowly, with the dignity of someone who has decided to allow something, she folded them back. The green one had not moved. He was watching Dina with the careful attention of someone reading a document in a language they mostly understood. His eyes moved between her face and the prosthetic leg she still held in her hand. Dina set the prosthetic on the rock beside her. She opened the worn canvas kit she carried everywhere. It was a field medic's habit that had never left her even after years of clinic work. She laid out what she had. Flexible med polymer sheeting in 2 thicknesses. A roll of adjustable strapping with heat-locking buckles. A small measuring tape. A folding ruler. Soft padding foam. Her fitting tools. She pointed at the green hatchling's leg. Then at her own. Then at the kit. He watched her. She picked up the measuring tape and held it toward him slowly, stopping before she reached him, letting him look at it. He leaned forward and sniffed it. Then he leaned back. She moved closer. She measured the length of his lower leg from joint to foot, keeping her hands gentle. He let her. She measured the width of the twisted joint, the angle of displacement, the length of his foot from heel to front claw. She wrote numbers on a small pad, and he watched the writing with apparent fascination. The blue hatchling sat just behind him and watched Dina with the fixed attention of a student at a lecture she does not entirely trust but cannot stop listening to. Dina looked at the measurements. She looked at her materials. She looked at his leg again. A prosthetic was not possible. Not here, not with what she had. His leg had its own structure, bent and turned, but present, and the bones were not absent, just wrongly angled. What he needed was not replacement. What he needed was support. Something to hold the joint at a better angle when he put weight on it. Something to spread the load away from the single point that was bearing all of it wrong. She had built worse things in worse places. A field camp in the Kellen lowlands with bent wire and spray foam. A shelter clinic on Outpost 7 with polymer sheeting and 4 functioning tools. She was not going to be stopped by a ravine. She started cutting. The green hatchling watched every movement. He was patient in a way that made her suspect he was in more discomfort than he showed. When she held up the first shaped piece of polymer to test the fit near his leg without touching it yet, he held still with a steadiness that took a kind of quiet courage. She built the brace in layers. The inner pad first, soft foam shaped to fit the inside angle of his joint, because anything hard against a pressure point would just cause different damage. Then the polymer shell, curved to cradle the outer face of the leg from mid-shin to just above the foot. Then the strapping, 3 points, adjustable, fitted so they distributed rather than constricted. It took nearly 3 hours. The sun came up and lit the ravine in pale copper. Somewhere above, the Dracarys market district was beginning to wake. She could hear distant sounds, the creak of stall frames, the low, resonant calls of adult voices carrying on the morning air. She fitted the brace carefully, one strap at a time. Then she stepped back. He sat with it for a moment. She could see him feeling the difference, the slight shift in how the joint was being held. He put weight on it experimentally, just a small adjustment of posture. Then more. He stood fully, and the change was visible immediately. He was level in a way he had not been before. Not perfect, not correct in any textbook sense, but no longer tilted into the bad angle that had been grinding the joint further wrong with every step. He took 3 steps forward. He stopped. He looked at his own foot. He took 3 more. The blue hatchling made a sound that Dina had no translation for, but did not need one. It was the sound of something that had been held very tight, letting go slightly. Dina packed her kit. She stood up and pointed in the direction of her clinic. She held up both hands, fingers spread. 10. She pointed at the ground here. She mimed returning. The green hatchling looked at her steadily. Then he made a sound she also had no translation for. But he dipped his head, just slightly, in a motion that was small and deliberate. She climbed back up the rocks. At the top, she looked back down. Both hatchlings were still watching her. The shoe collection sat along the shelter wall like a small museum of failed solutions and one enormous effort. She walked home barefoot on the cold stone path, her kit over her shoulder, the morning light coming in long gold lines through the silver grass, and she was already thinking about the proper brace she was going to build. Word traveled in Hearthgate the way word traveled in every small colony, sideways and faster than anyone expected. By the time Dina arrived at the clinic for her regular shift, Wren had already heard something from the supply coordinator, who had heard something from a Drackery market vendor, who had apparently seen a human woman climbing down into the low hollow before sunrise. By the time Dina had hung up her jacket and started the morning equipment check, a formal notice had arrived from the Drackery District Council requesting her attendance at a governance hearing. Wren held the notice out with the careful expression of someone handling something they were not sure was safe. Dina read it twice. Then she set it on her desk and finished the equipment check. "You're not panicking," Wren said. "It won't help. It might make me feel better." She told him what had happened in the ravine. All of it. The shoe collection, the green hatchling's leg, the brace she had fitted. He listened without interrupting, which was not his usual approach to conversations. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment in the way he went quiet when he was rearranging his understanding of something. "You went down there alone," he said. "I sat down and opened a kit. With a Drackery hatchling spreading wings at you." She folded them back. He did not argue further, which she appreciated. The council hearing was held 2 days later in the Drackery Administrative Hall, a wide, low-ceiling building by human standards, but vast by her own, with walls of smooth dark stone and long windows set high that let in columns of afternoon light. The council table was sized for Drackery, which meant Dina sat in a chair brought in specifically for her that made her feel like a child at an adult table. There were 5 council members. Elder Roth sat at the center, ancient even by Drackery reckoning, his scales the deep weathered gray-blue of old slate, his eyes steady and without particular expression. On his right sat Councillor Breck, younger, gray-green scaled, with the precise manner of someone who had made a career of knowing the rules. Breck opened the hearing and presented the complaint without drama and without malice, which, in Dina's experience, was the most uncomfortable kind. A human medical practitioner had conducted physical procedures on a Drackery minor without guardian consent, without species-appropriate anatomical assessment, without council approval, without documentation filed before the fact. Every point was technically correct. Every point was also true. When Breck finished, he folded his claws on the table and waited. Dina was given the floor. She did not argue the policy. She agreed that proper process had not been followed. She said she was prepared to follow proper process from this point forward, and that she was glad the council had created a path for her to do so. Then she opened her kit bag and placed her documentation on the table, her measurement notes, her material logs, the sketches she had made of the joint problem and the brace design, the observation notes she had written up about Orcs movement before and after the fitting. She talked through each item. Plain language. No terms she would not use with a patient. The council was quiet. Breck said that good intentions did not override proper jurisdiction. That a human practitioner operating on a Dracari body without species-specific training was a serious matter regardless of outcome. That the colony depended on both species trusting the boundaries of the other's authority. Dina said she understood. She also said that the boundaries had not been the first thing on her mind when she was looking at a young creature who could not walk correctly. Breck said the proper channel for that concern was a referral to a Dracari healer. Dina said she had been standing in a ravine at 5 in the morning with no Dracari healer present and a hatchling who was worsening his own joint damage every day by walking on it wrong. You could have left, Breck said. I could have, Dina agreed. Silence. Elder Roth had not spoken yet. He looked at the measurement notes. He looked at the sketches. He looked at Dina over the documentation for a moment, and whatever he was reading in her face, he did not say aloud. He asked, "Why did you not report the thefts to begin with?" Dina thought about it. Because whatever was taking those shoes was doing it very carefully, she said. One at a time. Always the same step. Never anything else. Something working that hard at a problem. I wanted to know what problem before I got anyone in trouble. Roth was quiet again. Then he said he had no further questions. He said it to Breck in a tone that was not quite an instruction, but was clearly not a suggestion. The hearing was tabled. No clearance, no penalty. The council requested a formal written proposal for any ongoing cross-species medical work within 30 days. It was, by the measure of how these things usually went, a significant outcome. Ren was waiting outside. He read her expression and exhaled. 30 days, Dina said. I'll start the paperwork tonight, he said. I'll write the proposal. Who do we know in Dracari Medical, he asked. Dina thought of the young Dracari physician she had met once at an interspecies health briefing. Quiet, curious, the only one who had stayed after to ask about prosthetic load mechanics. She had not expected to need that contact so soon. I know someone, she said. The Dracari physician's name was Hallett. He was young by Dracari standards, perhaps 40, which put him in the rough equivalent of a human in their late 20s, with pale amber scales and a way of listening that involved his whole body going very still. He had studied human medicine as an elective course during his training, which made him unusual in his field, and he had kept notes on it, which made him unusual generally. He came to the clinic on a gray morning 6 days after the council hearing. He stood in the doorway and looked at the clinic space with the particular attention of a person who is quietly comparing it to what they had expected. Then he said, in very careful standard that carried the slight musical rhythm of Dracari's speech, "Your workspace is smaller than I imagined." Most human spaces are, Dina said. Yes. He considered this. I will try not to knock anything over. He knocked over a supply rack within the first hour. They agreed to set up the workshop space in the larger storage room adjacent to the clinic, which had a ceiling high enough that he could stand without folding his neck. The formal proposal had been approved on day 28. The council had added 4 conditions, all reasonable, and Breck had attached a note requesting quarterly progress reports, which Ren described as the bureaucratic equivalent of someone folding their arms and watching. The first task was assessment. Hallett had a scanner calibrated for Dracari anatomy, a proper one, not borrowed, his own equipment carried in a case the size of a human trunk. He scanned Orc's leg completely while Dina watched the readout on a shared screen, pointing at features and asking questions and Hallett answering them with the patient thoroughness of someone who was genuinely enjoying having a colleague who asked questions he had not been asked before. The joint was a congenital displacement. The ball had formed slightly off-center in the socket, and the socket wall on one side had not developed enough to compensate. Not a break, not a disease, just a small error that had compounded over 3 years of a growing body learning to move around it incorrectly. The surrounding muscle structure had adapted to the wrong angle, which meant any correction had to work with the existing muscle memory rather than against it. It is not unlike what you called ACL compensation patterns, Hallett said, studying the scan, in humans who have carried an old injury for years. Dina pulled up her ACL brace data from the clinic archives. Hallett looked at it for a long time. The load distribution logic, he said slowly. Same principle, Dina said. They designed the brace over the next 2 weeks. The first prototype was wrong, too rigid on the upper strap, which restricted a range of motion Hallett identified as essential for Dracari rear leg mechanics during ground turns. They redesigned the upper section with a pivot hinge and a lighter polymer compound. The second prototype was better, but the inner padding compressed unevenly under sustained weight. Hallett suggested a layered fill material used in Drackery wound packing that had a different compression behavior than anything Dina's kit carried. They argued about material density for one full afternoon. Ren left the room. He came back with food and set it on the table between them and left again without speaking. They were both right, in the end, about different parts of it. The final design used Hallett's material for the inner layer and Dina's polymer compound for the outer shell, and the combination performed exactly as neither of them had modeled individually and both of them had arrived at together. The fitting session happened on a quiet afternoon with low clouds over Hearthgate and the smell of rain in the air. Or it came with Sora. He had grown slightly since the first brace, 3 years old, and putting on size fast, as young Drackery did. And the temporary brace Dina had built in the ravine had been adjusted twice by Hallett using notes Dina had left him. He walked into the storage room with careful steadiness, the old brace visibly worn at the straps. Sora sat in the corner the moment they arrived and did not move from there. She sat with her tail wrapped around her feet and her eyes tracking every object in the room as if she were responsible for all of them. Hallett fitted the new brace with Dina checking each strap point against the skin measurements. It took 40 minutes, or it held still with the same quiet endurance he had shown in the ravine. When the last strap was set, Hallett made a low sound of completion and stepped back. Or it stood. He walked the length of the storage room, turned, a proper ground turn, weight distributed, and walked back. Turned again. Then he began to trot, which was not planned, and his tail swung wide on the turn near the supply shelving, and the shelving lost an argument with the tail and polymer sample packets went in every direction. Hallett made a sound like a thunderclap. Dina sat on the floor laughing. Sora chirped. It was a small sound, sharp and bright, and entirely satisfied, and it was the first sound she had made in the workshop across 3 weeks of watching. It rang off the stone walls and the ceiling, and Rin stuck his head in from the doorway to find out what had happened and took in the scattered samples and Dina on the floor and Hallett's expression and made a face suggesting he had walked into something too good to interrupt. Elder Roth came that evening. Dina had not known he was coming. He stood in the workshop doorway and watched Orit walk 3 circuits of the room, and then he was silent for a long time. He said to Dina, in careful translated standard, "I believed humans built things. I had not understood that you also fixed them." Dina said she thought they were the same in that way. Roth said he was not certain that was true. He said it as a compliment. 6 months passed the way good months do, quietly, while full of things. The cross-species medical exchange program had a name now, printed on a small sign outside the clinic door in both standard and Drackery script. Hallett was co-director. Dina was co-director. The sign had taken 3 weeks to agree on because Breck had opinions about the order of the languages and Ren had opinions about the font size, and Dina had eventually told both of them to sort it out while she saw patients. They sorted it out. The sign looked fine. Hallett had brought 2 of his Drackery medical students into the exchange rotation. Dina had begun teaching a basic field assessment module adapted for cross-species first response. Rin ran the paperwork for all of it and complained about it daily and had recently begun learning basic Drackery script on his own time, which he had mentioned to no one but which Dina had noticed. Or it was in movement training. The brace had done what it was designed to do, not correct the joint entirely, which was not possible without surgical intervention neither party was ready to attempt, but stabilize it well enough that the surrounding muscle structure was slowly rebuilding in the right pattern instead of the wrong one. He would not fly. The rear leg affected his takeoff balance in a way that made flight a real risk. But he ran now. He had started racing the other young Drackery in the wide stretch of flat ground beyond the low hollow. He lost most of the races. He appeared to find this funny, which the other hatchlings found confusing and then, gradually, enjoyable. He had become, without apparently trying, the most popular fixture of the afternoon group, the one who lost cheerfully and came back faster the next day. Sora still came to the clinic every morning. She waited outside at dawn, sitting at the edge of the path with her tail wrapped around her feet, until Dina arrived to unlock the door. She was not yet old enough for a formal apprentice arrangement. Roth said this every week with the firmness of someone who had checked the rule carefully. He also personally walked her to the clinic path each morning before going to the council hall, which was not in the same direction, a fact that Dina had noticed early and continued not to mention. She had started teaching Sora small things. How to hold an instrument. How to be still when someone was in pain. How to wait. These were not formal lessons. They had no structure, no schedule, no name. But Sora watched everything with those enormous pale amber eyes, and whatever she learned, she held on to. On the last morning of the 6th month, Dina arrived at the clinic to find Sora not at the path's edge, but sitting directly on the front step. Beside her was a shoe. Old, soft-soled, scuffed at the toe and worn thin at the heel. One of the first ones stolen. Dina recognized the particular shape of the sole from years of wear. It had the small dent on the left edge where the strap of her prosthetic cuff had pressed against it. On top of the shoe was a scale. Not shed. Shed scales lay flat and had a dry, papery edge. This one was vivid and fresh, deep ocean blue with a gold tip that caught the morning light. It had been placed there deliberately, angled so the gold showed. Dina crouched down and looked at it for a moment. She did not touch it yet. She looked at Sora, who sat very straight and looked back at her with an expression that was attempting to be dignified and was mostly succeeding. Roth found Dina that afternoon and told her, without much preamble, that a freely given scale was not a casual gesture among Dracari. It was an offering of personal trust, the kind extended between individuals who had decided, without ceremony or documentation, that they were responsible for each other in some way. She has never given one before, he said. Not to anyone. Dina said she would take care of it. Roth said he had assumed as much. He left. Then, in the doorway, he stopped without turning around. He said, to the wall and to no one in particular. The council has received a proposal from Councillor Brecht to expand the medical exchange to 3 additional Dracari settlements. He submitted it this morning. Dina waited. He did not explain his reasoning, Roth said. He did not need to. He walked away. Dina put the shoe back in her closet, where it sat between a newer pair and a field boot that had seen better days. She put the scale on the wall above her desk with a small clip, where it caught whatever light came through the window at different hours of the day and turned it blue and gold on the wall behind her. Ren saw it that afternoon and asked what it was. She told him. He stood looking at it for a moment. That's a lot, he said, for something that started with a missing boot. Most things start small, Dina said. Outside, Sora was still on the step, having apparently decided that returning the shoe meant she now lived here. Dina could see the top of her blue-scaled head through the lower window, ears tilted toward the clinic interior, listening to everything. It had started with a stolen shoe. A small thief with no words for what she was trying to do, working alone in the dark with the only idea she had, taking one shoe at a time and hoping one of them would be the right one. None of them had been, but she had brought someone who was. And 2 worlds, which had been politely ignoring each other for 60 years, had taken 2 steps closer together, not through policy, not through ceremony, but through a hatchling who had looked at a problem and refused to look away.